Bert. Hearing is now resumed.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. This is Patrick McGowan. For the Commission with me is Jennifer Chan. We have a panel before you this morning consisting of three individuals, all of whom are presently members of the Monitoring Compliance Panel of the ISDF. Starting on my left, looking at the panel, we have Grand Chief Ken Malloway. Moving to the right, we have Colin Masson, and finally Peter Sackage. I'll just very briefly commence by running them through a brief outline of their background. Grand Chief Malloway, you're a member of the Stolo Tribal Council?
Yes.
Okay, perhaps we'll have the witnesses sworn first.
You solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
State your name, please.
Ken Malloway.
Thank you.
Colin Masson.
Thank you. Counsel?
Grand Chief Malloway, you're a member of the Stolo Tribal Council,
Yes.
and you're a hereditary chief of the Chilliwack tribe.
Yes.
You have a long history of involvement in fishing,
Yes.
and you're a member of the ISDF Monitoring Compliance Panel,
Yes.
and a fairly long-standing member of the Fraser Panel for 8 years.
Yes.
If we could have Grand Chief Malloway's bio put on the screen, please. That's our list of documents 15. And this is a biography. You'll see it come up before you shortly that you've seen. It outlines just a small number of items that you've been involved in. Is that fair?
Pardon?
This is a biography setting out some of the highlights of your involvement in matters related to fishing.
Yes, I was just admiring it.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 853.
Mr. Masson, you've been with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans since the 80s.
That's correct, yes.
You're presently the element lead for the Enhanced Accountability element of PICFI,
Correct.
and you're as well a member of the ISDF Monitoring Compliance Panel.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. And your CV is at our list of documents number 16. That's your CV on the screen.
Yes, yes it is.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 854.
And Mr. Sackage, you've worked in the commercial fishing industry since the 60s.
That's right.
You're presently the co-chair of the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board.
That's correct. And I am here for the monitoring panel.
Yes.
That's not the views of the Salmon Advisory Board.
No, I understand it.
Okay.
I was just outlining some of your credentials and some of the bodies you're involved with for the commissioner, so he understands the experience you bring. You're presently, in fact, the chair of the ISDF Monitoring and Compliance Panel, correct?
That's correct.
And you're as well a member of the Fraser Panel.
Yes.
If we could have Exhibit 422, please, Mr. Lund. You've been here previously as a witness, is that right?
Yes.
And the last time you were here, your bio was entered as an exhibit, and this is it that you're looking at here. Is that right?
That's just missing the Fraser panel. I believe that's all.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sackage and Mr. Masson, you were both here yesterday and watched the evidence. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you both saw yesterday, and we've certainly heard throughout this process that historically, fisheries monitoring and catch reporting has been an area with a certain degree of mistrust. Is that a fair understanding?
Yes, it certainly is. It's one big issue, and it seems to go through all processes, and it has had the capability of stalling an awful lot of things that we need to do.
I wonder if you could each just briefly address the commissioner and perhaps help him understand why it is that this tension exists from your perspective.
I think it's primarily a lack of understanding of what monitoring is conducted by each group. And it's often closely linked to other concerns that are prevalent in the dialogue, such as, and most importantly, access to the resource and allocation issues. Sometimes they can predominate the concern, and then the lack of understanding of monitoring confounds the problem, and distrust evolves.
Okay. Grand Chief Malloway, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, it has been a problem over the years, but with the amount of work that's going on with the integrated salmon dialogue forum and the Fraser Salmon Table and issues like that, there's becoming more and more understanding. We work with First Nations, commercial fishers, sports, DFO, and the province, and working on those issues, and they were starting to understand each other and get to know each other better.
Thank you. Mr. Sakis, do you have anything to add?
Yes, as recently as a couple of weeks ago at the Integrated Harvest Management Planning meetings, it generally always seems to find its way back to this mistrust of the catch monitoring. It's wherever you go, and then it's not just reserved for any one sector or user group or anything. It's equally, everybody gets their turn. So they're all in the barrel together.
All right. Mr. Masson, to address this history of mistrust and also to address matters related to the accuracy of and reliability of catch reporting, has the department has over the years engaged in policy development and undertaken a number of initiatives to address these issues. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to address some questions to you, sir, about some of these initiatives and some of this policy development, starting in 2002. In 2002, the Pacific Fishery Monitoring and Reporting Framework was developed. Is that right?
That's correct.
If we could bring up Exhibit 268, please. And this is a document you've become familiar with through your work at the time and over the years.
That's correct. I wasn't involved in its development. There was an internal team of 12 to 20 individuals from all the various harvest, for the various species groups and sectors that were involved in its development.
This document, this framework, the intention of it was to facilitate a review by the department in cooperation with stakeholders, including First Nations, of monitoring, fisheries monitoring and catch reporting systems in the Pacific region. Is that right?
That's correct.
And ultimately, it set out a number of principles related to fishery monitoring and catch reporting.
Quite right, yeah.
I wonder if we could bring up, please, page 28 of the Policy and Practice Report. I'm just going to read to you, sir, the first principle. Principle 1, all fisheries must have fishery monitoring and reporting programs, and they must be of sufficient accuracy and precision to address conservation needs, including the need for the appropriate and timely control of fishing. So that's where the department got to in 2002, is that right? One of the places they got to in this report.
That's quite right. It recognizes that fundamentally the key thing is to ensure information is available to ensure conservation can be achieved.
Does that remain true today?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this policy document was taken out for some consultation in 2002 and subsequently?
It was indeed, yeah.
Okay. What ultimately happened with the initiatives set out in this document and with respect to moving forward with the 2002 framework?
Well, it served several purposes. It certainly raised attention to the importance of monitoring across the board, and it looked at the issue of fishery monitoring, catch reporting, in a way that started to lay it out where the issues were understandable and the path forward was clearer, and it certainly identified some internal work that the Department of Fisheries needed to address and things that needed to happen together with harvesters.
Ultimately, did this 2002 framework go anywhere?
The focus on the document itself perhaps was not as great in the subsequent years. It was used as an underlying piece and a foundation of much of the work that continued, particularly in the integrated groundfish fishery evolution, where catch information was critically important to moving forward there.
We could go to the bottom of the next page of the Policy and Practice Report, please. Now this, I'm taking you to paragraph 64, sir, which I think you've seen before. It says, according to, and this is taken from a document which is cited there, according to one DFO employee, the 2002 framework soon went off the radar screen and not much happened with it. I think you've seen the document that came from. Do you disagree with that statement?
No. I think fundamentally the document had served some very useful purposes, but the focus was on other issues at the time, and yeah, I'd fundamentally agree.
Did this document and the matter set out in it receive the attention that was needed going forward after 2002?
No, I don't believe it did.
In 2002, there was an effort to revitalize 2004, there was an effort to revitalize the 2002 framework?
That's correct.
Okay, and then in 2005, the department announced its Pacific Region Fisheries Monitoring and Catch Reporting initiatives?
That's correct.
2006, the department conducted an audit of the management control framework supporting statistical information on fisheries?
Yeah, that was a national audit across the country.
In January 2007, the department launched the Salmon Fisheries Reform Fisheries Monitoring and Catch Reporting Traceability Lower Fraser Focus Project?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Commissioner, just for your benefit, those programs or policies are all described in our policy and practice report. And ultimately, through that evolution, we ultimately get to PICFI in 2007. Is that right, sir?
That's correct. And the initiative you spoke of just prior to that was a preliminary program that helped to set the stage for the PICFI initiative.
Okay. One of the key elements under PICFI is enhanced accountability.
That's correct.
And that's closely tied to catch monitoring.
Yes.
You're assigned as the lead of that element.
That's correct.
And your position's funded through PICFI.
Yeah.
And you have 4 others under you funded through PICFI in that group.
That's correct.
I take it one of the first things you must have done when you were assigned as the enhanced accountability lead is look at catch monitoring across the board and identify those issues or fisheries that needed particular attention or were causing you some concern. Is that fair?
That's fair, but I would cast it a little differently. It was actually prior to PICFI I was involved in that initiative in 2005, where we were taking a more focused look at the fishery monitoring issues and developing a broad strategy. At that time, we picked up on the information provided in the 2002 framework and particularly highlighted 3 fundamental issues that the department needed to address internally. One of those was the development of some system of standards for fishery monitoring catch reporting. Another was to improve our fisheries information management systems and acknowledgement of some shortfalls in that regard. And then thirdly, to address accountabilities and roles and responsibilities internally, again, recognizing some shortfalls in that regard. At the same time, there was work with the regional executive to confirm those as key issues we had to address, and also to confirm that the priority fisheries we were going to focus on were commercial salmon, FSC fisheries of all species, and recreational fisheries. Okay.
So those were the 3 fisheries that you identified as needing the most concern at that time?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Malloway or Mr. Sakis, do you have anything to add? Do you agree with the identification of those 3 as at that time needing attention?
No, I don't have anything to add.
Mr. Sakis?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Was part of your task also considering the recommendations made by Mr. Williams in his report?
Yes, that was part of the information we reviewed and considered.
Okay. What has been the budget assigned to you through PICFI?
PICFI is a 5-year program. The funding levels in enhanced accountability have varied by year. Given its sunset nature, it has declined in the last year slightly. And so in enhanced accountability, we've been looking at budgets for catch monitoring at a high level of 1.7 million per year, and at a low level, this being our last sunset year, of 1.2 million. In addition to that, there's 400,000 that's directed towards the CNP, or conservation and protection element of enhanced accountability, and then a smaller budget assigned to the development of a traceability framework and pilot projects associated with that. That budget level is approximately 100,000 per year. Actually, yeah, 100,000 per year.
Okay, thank you. And you're talking, when you say 100,000 a year, for the duration of PICFI?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in 2008, the Monitoring and Compliance Working Group was struck, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's a multi-sectoral group designed to examine ways to improve monitoring and catch reporting?
That's correct.
In 2009, ultimately, the Monitoring and Compliance Panel was developed. Is that correct?
That's right.
As I understand from looking at the documents, that was designed to develop operating principles and guidelines for fish monitoring and catch reporting.
Correct. I'd just like to clarify at this point, though, that the Monitoring Compliance Panel was not a construct of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. It was the product of the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, and arose from a recognition that fisheries catch information was a critical piece to get right, and that all of the participants in that forum recognized the importance of trying to do so. So there was considerable preliminary discussion that eventually resulted in the development of a monitoring compliance panel.
That leads nicely into my next question, sir. I wonder if you can address the Commissioner on the importance of policy development in this critical area being conducted by bodies involving not just the department but also other user groups.
Well, I mean, technically policies are developed by government. And however, the interests and contributions of those that are affected by policies are critically important for the government in its development of policy. So in this particular case, the Monitoring Compliance Panel, whose purpose is not just the development of policy, but a broader look at trying to make improvements in fishery monitoring, catch reporting, has an interesting and very valuable role in trying to look at policy options in moving forward.
Okay. Grand Chief Malloway, I wonder if you want to comment on the importance of First Nations being involved in the development of operating principles and guidelines for fish monitoring.
Well, since a number of court cases have pointed out the need for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to consult with First Nations, it's become pretty clear that there was a need for us to be involved, and with not only with the DFO but other sectors as well, to work on this. It's very important. So it's a good. I think it's a good process. And there's a lot of good work being done there.
Thank you. Mr. Sakic, did you want to add anything to the importance of this being sort of a multi-sectoral development?
Yes, I would. It is the diversity of having everybody together, and in fact, having the government in there as well. So at least when you're going to come forward with something like this, there's no use being at odds when you end up with the product. And so having the First Nations, commercial, government, recreational, environmental in the room doing these things, we all somewhat agree with the direction that we have taken, and what our next steps will be another question.
Yeah. As one commercial, or the panel as one commercial fisher, how is it you got appointed to that position?
Well, you're not really appointed to them when they sort of struck the panels, and myself personally, I took the information back to the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board, and anybody that wanted to go was welcome. And a few people showed up, and they came and they went, and now there's still occasionally a couple of few will show up, and that's about it. So it's not really an appointed thing. We just sort of evolutionized into it. And early in the game, like the amount of people that were invited to attend those salmon dialogue forums and be part of one of these working groups if they wanted to, it wasn't restricted. Email lists were huge, about as broad coverage as you're going to get, and a lot of the folks in the commercial industry would show up these salmon dialogue forums, but did not really want to participate in the working group. But it's nobody was shut out.
Right. Do you feel that you fairly represent the commercial perspective in your role on this panel?
Well, I think I represent the inevitable. I'm not going to say there's a perspective, because some folks would like to move forward with things and some don't, but it is inevitable you are going to end up in this spot. That's a given, or you're not going to fish. So you might as well work with a group where you can get your way through there.
Thank you. Thank you. Grand Chief Malloway, I'm going to ask you the same question. How was it that you became a member of the panel? Were you appointed, or?
Well, I was asked to attend the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum. And that at first, the first go-around, there were a number of people that were invited. Some folks showed up that weren't invited, but they weren't turned away. And eventually, I wanted to be on the monitoring and compliance panel because I'm the chairman of the Fraser Valley Aboriginal Fisheries Society, and all we do is count fish. So that's why I wanted to be on it, and I was accepted.
And do you feel in your role on the monitoring and compliance panel that you can speak on behalf of First Nations broadly on issues related to catch monitoring?
I only speak for those folks that I'm working with in Fraser Valley.
Okay. Mr. Masson, I understand the budget for the monitoring compliance panel is approximately $85,000 or $90,000 per year right now.
In fact, the budget has been about $160,000, but the funding has been split between the department and the Fraser River Assembly, and so the departmental share in the past year was about $187,000.
So the department share was
87.
Was 87.
My
Okay,
mistake.
that's fine.
Slipped
I just
it
wanted to
wrong.
make sure
Yeah,
there
thank
wasn't
you.
a slip there. Ultimately, the monitoring and compliance panel developed a document called Charting Our Course, Fishery Monitoring in the Pacific Region, a strategy for improved confidence and support. Is that right?
That's correct.
I wonder if we could bring up our document number 19, please, Mr. Lunn. Now, Mr. Commissioner, just so your draft of this document entered as an exhibit, and that's Exhibit 428, we now have a subsequent, more recent draft, and I think perhaps the final draft, and I'm going to suggest that be entered as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 855.
Mr. Masson, what was the purpose of this document?
Purpose of this document was to develop a framework by which initially in the panel itself we could really look and examine monitoring programs in a consistent way so that we could start to compare and discuss fisheries with similar requirements and to give us a frame to look at fisheries with vastly different requirements. In addition to that, it was going to serve as a guide to move forward with suggestions and recommendations to the department and to harvesters.
I see reference in the document to what they describe a crisis of confidence. Was the approach set out in the document designed to address that?
Quite right. Again, as arose in the discussions at the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, there was a great deal of concern about the lack of confidence in each other's numbers, and not just from harvesters, but from the general public as well. And in the department, we had been recognizing this issue and the challenges associated with that lack of confidence as well.
One of the things that I see referenced in the document a number of times and seems to be a recurring theme is the need for a consistent approach to catch monitoring. Mr. Sakich, I wonder if you can perhaps address what's meant by that phrase that we see in the document and how it can be accomplished.
Well, I don't think you're consistent in the way you get to the outcomes, the desired outcome level of monitoring. I think that it is the level of monitoring that you want to be consistent on. I think that's basically what that means. How you get there is another story.
Okay. Grand Chief Malloway, do you have anything to add to that? Is what you're trying to say, Mr. Sakich, that the monitoring apparatus or structure may not be the same in every fishery? It's the outcome that you're trying to have consistent?
It is the outcome that gives you the public confidence, the sector confidence, the users between each other. That would be the outcome. That would be the consistent part.
Okay. You agree with that, Mr. Masson?
I do. I think it also draws out the point and the recognition that not all fisheries are the same. They operate in different scales and in different regimes with different risks. But what's important is a consistent approach to examine the information requirements.
And that approach is set out in the Charting Our Course document?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, subsequent, or at least at the same time, perhaps, the development of this document was taking place, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans developed the strategic framework for fishery monitoring and catch reporting in the Pacific fisheries. Is that right?
I think the sequencing is important here. So, as you pointed out, I had been working on catch monitoring issues previously. And internally, I had begun the process of looking at a broader framework to guide our approach. It became clear in our work on the Monitoring Compliance Panel that they too, collectively, we were looking for some kind of a framework to examine monitoring and a path forward. So the department agreed that we would work collaboratively on this document. And so internally, I had been presenting early versions of the document, and then the monitoring compliance charting our course document had become firmed up, and we had a close to finished product. And at the same time, the department recognized that we had to focus on some of our internal objectives specifically. So we needed to be able to spell out some policy direction and direction to staff, excuse me, and a document by which we could consult broadly on the subject and then move forward. And so it's from that process that the strategic framework arose.
There are differences between the strategic framework and the charting our course approach, correct?
There are, but it's only fair to say, and quite appropriate, that the charting our course largely informed the strategic framework document.
I guess my question would be then, sir, if you had the Monitoring and Compliance Panel, who together with representatives from the interested sectors put their heads together, came up with a document that had consensus support, at least within the panel, why did the department then go and create its own document through a separate process, which it is taking out for consultation, instead of using the Charting Our Course document that was developed collaboratively?
It's a fair point, because we did develop that document collaboratively. But it became clear in discussions with the senior managers that the department had objectives of our own that we needed to spell out in our document. And it's clearer for the department to undertake a consultation process where we can specifically engage the harvest sectors for feedback. And also, it's appropriate for the department to be setting direction for its staff and to establish the appropriate policy foundations by which we can have discussions with our national counterparts on the same issues. So the regional executive had directed that really the department needs its own framework that establishes its role in trying to develop and firm up policy.
Mr. Sakich, do you support the approach outlined in the strategic framework document?
Yes, they're quite similar. I think the end result gets you to the same place.
Grand Chief Malloway?
Yeah, I support it.
Okay. Mr. Maston, who's ultimately responsible for implementing the strategy set out in the strategic framework?
The ultimate part concerns me. Ultimately, the department has a responsibility for ensuring conservation of the resource, and fisheries monitoring, catch reporting features into that in a clear way. But it's clear that one of the things I've learned about catch reporting especially is that the department can't do it alone. And so by collaborating with harvesters, we can gain support and understanding for the collection of fisheries information. And so my answer would be the department has ultimate responsibility for managing the fisheries resource for the people of Canada. But really, we need to work on this collectively with our stakeholders, and First Nations especially.
And speaking just very generally so that the Commissioner has a sense, the strategic framework mandates that each fishery be assessed for the risk it presents and then a level of monitoring is assigned at either the low, moderate, or enhanced level. Is that correct?
That's correct. Each fishery, I think you said fisher.
I meant to say fishery if
Yep.
I didn't. And have those levels of monitoring been assigned for all fisheries?
No, I mean, I think it's only fair to say that the strategic framework is, at this stage, still a proposed framework. So we will be finalizing that in due course. Having said that, the framework does outline a process that each resource manager, in working with the harvest groups, would review and confirm the level of fishery information that's required, a low, moderate, or enhanced, and then develop a path to get there if it's not indeed already achieving it.
Okay. Will it all be implemented by March of 2012 when PICFI sunsets?
That's a really broad question, and when you say will it all, I have to kind of just make some assumptions about what you're saying. I think
Perhaps let me ask the question in a clearer way then. Will each of the Fraser sockeye fisheries have a requisite level of monitoring determined and the structure to support that level of monitoring in place by March 2012?
No, I would say it's going to be a work in progress.
What do you have a strategy in place to ensure that there is somebody responsible or accountable to ensure that the work that has been started continues after PICFI sunsets?
Yes, one of the things I've been focusing on in my work through this PICFI program is to ensure that the initiative has legs, that we can ensure that we're going to move forward and that the lag in progress that we might have observed from 2002 does not happen again. So I've been looking at this in various ways. We're working to ensure that the information management framework that we've been investing heavily in is largely operational by the end of PICFI. In the course of our work, we've identified two really important roles that were not previously funded in the department. One deals with the ability to provide integrated fisheries information and to look after that information management framework I spoke of. And another is, a regional monitoring coordination role. And so whilst these are currently funded through PICFI, we're in the process in the department of trying to find the kind of resources to make that happen. In addition, we've identified some specific ongoing core operational costs, things like license costs for software and so forth, that are going to be required to enable the ongoing implementation of these kind of programs. So there's some core work that we're doing to plug gaps and identify additional gaps that need to be filled prior to the end of PICFI. The work on the strategic framework and the processes that are proposed in terms of identifying monitoring programs, identifying gaps, looking at them in a consistent framework in terms of the levels of information that are required. There's policies associated with that we're in the process of implementing as well.
I wonder if you could just clarify for me, who is going to have accountability for ensuring that this 2010 strategic framework doesn't go off the radar the way the 2002 framework did? Is there an individual who's accountable to ensure that doesn't happen within the department?
Accountability would largely rest with the executive, and so I would have to say that ultimately that's with our departmental executive.
Thank you. Mr. Sakic and Mr. Masson, you were both here yesterday and you heard the evidence of Mr. Hootman, Parslow, and Jantz. And you heard them, I expect, express their views that monitoring in the First Nations fisheries they were speaking of and the commercial fisheries they were speaking of was either good or very good. I believe we heard Mr. Hootman give a number somewhere around the 95%, and I think Mr. Parslow may have said something like 90% accuracy is what they were looking at. First of all, do any of you disagree with those assessments?
Well, I just maybe not so much disagree as to need some things clarified to me, and one would be when you look at the commercial sector and you gave it a fairly high rating. Now, to get to that rating, are you blending all of the ones that are getting it right with the ones that aren't getting it right to it's not the road I think we should be going down as we're all trying to get it right together.
Right.
Don't water it down, if I'm correct at the way I was looking at it.
Thank you. Grand Chief Malloway, do you have anything to add?
Well, the way that fisheries is monitored in British Columbia is quite different in different areas. I think that comment would be very close to describing the monitoring that goes on in our area in the Fraser Valley. But I couldn't say the same for other parts of the province.
I guess the question that may arise when we hear the evidence of where we've got 90% accuracy, 95% accuracy, Mr. Masson, is why are we spending millions of dollars every year and putting so much effort into catch monitoring if we're reaching those accuracy levels? Should we be putting the money into habitat work, perhaps? If you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think it's important to just clarify as well. My understanding from the discussion and the evidence from Mr. Houtman and Mr. Parslow was that they were speaking to very specific fisheries for which they had done calculations and calculated precision estimates and so forth. They were not suggesting that across the board all of our fisheries are operating at that level. There is this issue of confidence. Earlier you asked about how prevalent is that, and I can attest to going to meetings with First Nations where they were very concerned about the lack of monitoring in the recreational sector and in some aspects of the commercial sector. And certainly with the commercial sector, where they really didn't want to engage in discussions of improved monitoring until other issues had been addressed in monitoring of other sectors, and so on and so forth. So whilst in some fisheries we are certainly on the mark, I would suggest, there's lots of situations where we're not. And a need for improvement has been identified in every one of our harvest sectors, but not everywhere. There are lots of places we're doing well.
Thank you. With respect to the approach set out in the strategic framework, I just had a question about that for you, Mr. Masson. And it's this. It mandates that a particular level of risk be assigned for each fishery and then a level of monitoring be determined. And I'm wondering, is it the case that with varying run sizes, a particular fishery may require different levels of monitoring in different years depending on run size?
I mean, that's absolutely the case. I think that it boils down to trying to be clear when we talk about monitoring programs, what is our definition of fishery? What is the scope of a particular fishery? For example, if we talk about the Area E gillnet fishery in Lower Fraser, it has different target fisheries. There's a sockeye fishery, there's a chum fishery, and in some situations, and perhaps in the past, there might have been other fisheries that were conducted. And certainly outside of the Lower Fraser, the Area E guys might fish elsewhere. Each of those fisheries has their own context. Each year there may be different conservation issues and risks to address. And there may be other management objectives to address in different years and different situations. And so, yes, that's one of the real challenges in monitoring programs. The requirements can change over time. And at the same time, you want to have an understandable program, something that's as consistent as possible and not constantly be changing the requirements to add to the confusion. So the objective is understandable programs that meet the requirements, that can adjust for some of the variations, but recognizing that there can be changes and can be different requirements.
Has the department conducted an assessment of what the implementation of the strategic framework is going to mean in terms of costs either to the department or to fishers?
Not in its entirety. We've been doing some preliminary work in that regard.
Okay. In recent years, Mr. Masson, I understand that the department has been moving some of the costs of monitoring from the department onto fishers in the commercial fishery. Is that correct?
That is correct.
For example, the ITQ fisheries in Area H, Troll, and Area B Seine, who pays for that enhanced monitoring level?
That's paid for by the harvesters.
Okay. Is there a plan on behalf of the department to move additional cost associated with monitoring onto commercial fishers?
That is a stated intention, where there's enhanced monitoring especially. And the department also recognizes that support is required, not just financial support, but capacity development is another kind of support that's required. Yeah, so costs for monitoring to be transferred for enhanced programs to the commercial sector, and also efforts to try to support the shift in other ways as well.
Mr. Sakis, do you have a comment on that stated approach?
Yes, and leading up to it first. And the difference in this charting our course and that strategic framework is this charting our course needs to be a living document. It's got to keep going on into the future. Because when you get into the situations, as Colin just explained, with the cost effectiveness of all of these sort of programs and who's bearing it, how you can do things different, and to be able to work with the different sectors so they'll accept what would be at some point what might be an acceptable level to fisheries and oceans might not be acceptable amongst the harvesters. So you've got two different things to look at here as you move forward, and just to come out with a blanket thing and say, well, that's it, this is where it's going to be, without a home for this to work from, could be very problematic. And like I said, I don't see this particular charting our course stopping here. We talk about cost effective in here, various different ways that costs can be reduced, still have the same effects, but we have to have a place amongst each other to be able to discuss this, because you have a hard time to sell it to anybody on your own.
Is it your sense that commercial fishers are content with the proposition that they are going to bear the increased burden of enhanced monitoring?
No, they're not content. It's very expensive in the ITQ fishery at the moment, and I would think in consulting with the groups that are doing this that there can be ways that this can be worked out that can give the same results. Nothing's going to be free, but it doesn't have to be exorbitant either.
Okay.
It should be more industry driven or user driven, to if they can get the outcomes that government is requiring, get the outcomes that each other are requiring. That's the correct way to do things, and having a place to do it.
Grand Chief Malloway, in the economic opportunity fisheries, similar to the ITQ fisheries in the commercial fishery, every fish is counted. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Mr. Masson, who's presently bearing the cost of catch of the structure associated with catch monitoring in the economic opportunity fisheries?
Those costs are covered through agreements with the department and First Nation organizations.
Okay. The agreements with the department, you're speaking of AFS agreements?
AFS agreements, yes.
And that money comes from the department?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there money from PICFI also used for that?
PICFI's primarily been focused on projects that are transformative, trying to find new ways of doing business. We have supported some monitoring, particularly where it provides a base to move forward.
Is there a plan on behalf of the department, similar with the conventional commercial fishery, to transition some of the costs of monitoring onto a communal commercial fisheries conducted by First Nations?
There's no current plan, but there's been some discussion that perhaps when those fisheries are fully functioning, and in that context, I'm also talking about pilot commercial First Nation fisheries in the interior. When they're fully functioning, that at some point in the future they may well be.
Has the department done an analysis as to whether these economic opportunity fisheries are sufficiently commercially viable such that they could support the structure required to conduct the requisite level of catch monitoring?
No. Sorry, did you? I said no.
Yeah.
They haven't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You say you're going to wait until they're fully functioning to consider this. Pilot sales have been going on since 1992. Are they now fully functioning in some areas, commercial fisheries?
Much like the other fisheries, they're quite variable.
Mr. Sakis, you spoke of trying to find ways that were efficient or economically reasonable to deal with this. Right now in the economic opportunity fisheries and in the ITQ fisheries, every fish is counted. Has any thought been given to a plan where every fish wouldn't be counted, perhaps an audit approach, which was fisher reported driven, but with a random audit of a selection of the catch and perhaps some penalties for not accurately reporting?
Yes, we did talk about that in general around our discussions, leading up to this, that innovation would be one of the functions of this monitoring panel. And yes, random auditing, it's used on the East Coast in some places. What they have, it's very simple. They have a drop-off place for the logbooks. And just because it's convenient there with the shape of the harbor, or whatever the case is, the vessels come in with the fish on board. They have to drop their logbook off. In our case, we have other options, which is electronic and various things like that, which we should get to at some point here. It's been a lot of work done there. But anyways, it's very much the same here. They'd be electronically reported, or however else you're going to do your logbook. And it's not necessarily clear to anyone who is going to get audited. So you run quite a risk by not doing things correctly, and the cost is greatly reduced.
Grand Chief Malloway, have you given any thought to whether that might also be an appropriate approach in the some of the Aboriginal commercial fisheries?
Actually, we have done some work in that area in the past. We have had levy fisheries in our agreements. Up to 10% of our allocation went back into the organization to help pay for the fishery. But we've tried it a few times, and there's always some kind of a problem on trying to collect it. Sometimes collecting it from the buyers, the money that is supposed to be turned over. But we have tried a couple of times. Most recently, there was a type of levy in a fishery that we conducted on pink salmon 2 years ago. That was when Tsawwassen First Nation couldn't catch their allocation. They transferred it to Chilliwack area, and they said, "We'll transfer the allocation," and they want 10% of the money that's raised. And so for every fish that we caught and sold, 10% went to Tsawwassen. So it is possible.
Right now in the economic opportunity fishery, every fish is counted, correct?
Yes.
And are, at least speaking on behalf of the First Nations you're associated with, is there any resistance to that approach?
No, First Nations welcome it. We've been under a microscope for years, even prior to 1992 when we signed our first AFS agreement to sell fish. We were under the microscope before then, but especially since then. So we've never ever been opposed to counting every fish. We want to be able to justify our fishery and to say that every fish is being counted, that it is accurate 100%.
How important is it that the fish monitors are arm's length from the fishers?
Arm's length?
Arm's length, yes.
I think that's very important. There was some discussion over the years about the monitoring program that we've had. Initially, it was the Lower Fraser Fisheries Authority, and that was Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and the Fraser Valley bands. And then after that, it was after we split, it was Fraser Valley bands, and they were part of the Stalo Nation. And so there was some concern that maybe there might be political interference, or that it was too political. Recently, over the last few years, we've established the Fraser Valley Aboriginal Fisheries Society, and that organization is non-political. We haven't had appointments of chiefs or anything like that. It's just a board of directors that has been selected, and the board of directors runs the organization, but we don't have any political ties.
Thank you. And just finally, I'm going to ask each of you if you have any recommendations for the commissioner to consider as he goes forward with his work. Mr. Sakic?
I'd like to make a recommendation that we do the most we can in the future to keep this independent body that will change from time to time as we show as a membership of Charting Our Course, to keep that intact and funded, because we are going to have a lot of problems amongst ourselves if we're not going to have a place where we can all meet the different users and work out the small things rather than having the confrontational end of things.
Thank you. Grand Chief Malloway, do you have anything to add?
I agree with Peter. I think that there's a lot of good work that's being done by the monitoring and compliance panel, and the membership at the panel is made up of all the sectors, and I think it's the way to go.
Thank you. Mr. Masson, do you also support that?
I certainly do. This collaborative experience from the department's perspective has been very successful and very positive.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, those are my questions. Gentlemen, please answer any of the questions my friends might have.
Mr. McGowan, I just want to know what is the exhibit number for the strategic document?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, the 2010 strategic framework is Exhibit 429. Dylan, if we could just bring that up to confirm that. Yes, there it is on the screen in front of you, Mr. Commissioner. Just for your benefit, Mr. Commissioner, you'll also find that document discussed in the Policy and Practice Report.
Right.
I believe commencing at page 47. I may have that wrong. Pardon me, commencing at page 52, I think.
And I just wanted this clarification from Mr. Masson. Mr. Masson, just with respect to PIC fee and funding of catch monitoring within the DFO, the budgetary process for that, in other words, catch monitoring is here to stay, and it's, I think, as Mr. Sakic would say, it's inevitable. PIC fee may sunset, it may not sunset, but just give me a sense, if you can, of the budgeting process within DFO with regard to catch monitoring.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Commissioner. Catch monitoring activities are conducted by both resource management staff and stock assessment staff. They're conducted as part of the regular operational work that the department does. And so, therefore, they are largely funded through A-based programs, ongoing operational funding. The world of fishery monitoring catch reporting is broad, though, so it also includes the requirement to manage fisheries information. And there are a staff associated with that, with programming and so forth, and you heard me reference some of our challenges with that and so forth. And in addition, the conservation and protection staff are focused on ensuring compliance with fisheries, and they also contribute to raising awareness and a successful catch monitoring, although not in collecting information specifically targeted on catch estimation. But they have a supportive role. And then PIC fee, being a sunsetting program, was focused primarily, my element was focused on trying to find ways to move forward. So we funded projects that were transformative in nature, looking at new tools, new methodologies, looking at programs to address accountabilities and sort out some of the internal work. And again, as I mentioned, our significant investment in improving our capacity to manage fisheries information. So it is an ongoing operational cost. There are ongoing dollars assigned to that in the operational budgets. And I think also you heard yesterday that some areas and some programs feel that they have insufficient levels of ongoing operational costs, and the department's looking at how to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Taylor will examine the panel next.
Mitchell Taylor for the participant Government of Canada, and with me is Hugh McCauley. I'll begin. Firstly, I have been allotted 45 minutes. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. McGowan has indicated there might be a 5-minute flex in that, and I will endeavor to remember at 1/4 the hour that we take a break, and perhaps Mr. McGowan or Mr. McCauley will ensure that I remember that. Panel members, and in particular Mr. Masson, just continuing with what the Commissioner was asking you a moment or so ago, I think, as I understood the Commissioner's question, and I want to see if you can expand on what you've already said, he was really asking what part of funding for monitoring and reporting work comes through or from PICFI, and what will be done after that. Put another way, will anything be left hanging after any sunsetting by PICFI, and if so, what would be done about that? Mr. Masson?
Yeah, thanks. So, with our focus on transformative projects, we've been very cognizant of trying to minimize ongoing operational commitments post-PICFI. Having said that, our largest single investment has been in PACFISH, the Information Management Framework. And so we've invested considerable sum of money in that. And by the end of this fiscal year, it will be $2.6 million. That information framework will be functioning at as this fiscal year unfolds, but it won't be at its full capacity. And so additional resources are required to complete the development of that information framework. And so we're preparing for that by very carefully developing additional implementation plans, breaking out all of the components so that they can be funded individually, as well as a complete package for that development. In addition to that, I mentioned previously that we had identified some core roles that were not a part of the department's operations before. One of those roles we call the provision of integrated information. It's really an individual who's responsible for the ongoing management of that information framework.
So that would be the regional coordinator that you spoke of when Mr. McGowan was asking.
That's right, the regional data coordinator. And so whilst that has been funded in the interim through PICFI, we are currently examining ways to fund it into the future. But at this point, the answers are not evident. Similarly, we identified another role that will enable us to continue the work established in the strategic framework, or proposed in the strategic framework, and that is a regional monitoring coordinator role, in order to look at best management practices, coordinated monitoring between different fisheries, and so forth. Again, funded currently, and under at this point searching for long-term solutions for that internally, but none evident at this point. Again, just to dwell a little bit further on the information management, there are some ongoing operational costs that will have to be absorbed into the department that we've identified internally. In addition to that, partly through the process of examining our monitoring programs and the work that's being conducted through PICFI, and in our initial consultations on the strategic framework, it's become clear that some areas are short in operational costs for the ongoing implementation of catch monitoring programs that currently exist. And so we'll be continuing to examine that and trying to find priorities, a prioritization process that might work to cover that off. Catch monitoring activities can vary greatly. I mean, you can have, there's always more information that somebody wants. And one aspect of the framework is it helps us to focus on where are the priority gaps. And so it's through this process, I think, that the clarification of priority gaps that we'll be able to really zero in on what the shortfalls are on in terms of operational cost for ongoing monitoring programs. I think that pretty much sort of covers the deal. The other investments from PICFI have been primarily centered around developmental projects, tools and methodologies with an eye to not have ongoing implications in terms of funding.
Without getting into the detail, but from your long experience with the department and knowing something about how budget works, would it be right that the ability and the source to find money to pay for the things that you've just described, which is some ongoing data monitoring, software development, et cetera, and at least two positions, a regional monitoring coordinator and a regional data coordinator. In terms of the departmental budgetary process, would it be right that money would need to be found through reallocating money from other sources, seeking new money from the center of government, or finding flexibility, if you like, in existing budgets, either regionally or nationally?
Yes, that does cover the range of options you have. And if I could add one more comment, that level of resources that I referenced is to enable the information management system to function at its minimum level, and at its recognizing that the entire framework is not completely developed, and that there would be additional resources to gain the full benefits of that in the due course of time. And so it's actually 2.8 for some programming costs, close to 3 FTEs altogether, is at a minimum level. And a larger chunk of money required as a one-off to complete the development of that framework as well.
All right, thank you. Mr. Malloway and Mr. Sakic, I don't expect you to be intimately familiar with all of the budgetary processes within DFO, but at the same time, given your long experience in fisheries and working with DFO, you probably have some knowledge. In terms of the identified priorities that Mr. Masson just put forward, which seem to be some continued work on data management systems and software, and at least 2 coordinator positions, one for data, one for monitoring that you've heard, do you agree that those are priorities and the key priorities that need to be put in place going forward, or do you see anything else? I'll start with you, Mr. Malloway's giving the nod to Mr. Sakic, so you go first.
Yes, I do. In fact, we haven't heard much about it, but there hasn't been enough credit actually given to the fact of the established electronic program which DFO has put together.
Is that the log shoot?
That's right.
We'll come back to that in a minute,
yeah.
But just focusing on what we're on right now.
But
bring in what you need.
It is somewhat the same, isn't it?
Okay.
Money for those sort of priorities?
Okay, we'll speak to that then as you see it.
I agree it should continue on, and with some of that work that's already been done is a great starting point for the rest of us to use.
All right.
It becomes a service.
In terms of the electronic logs, we've heard some evidence on it, and you heard some yesterday, and there seems to be some differing views about it. Can you elaborate or expand on the electronic logs, you being one of the users of those, and how workable they are, what you think of them, and the ability to get your fishing done and at the same time provide the information that's being required?
I don't use one. I use the old system mainly because I'm not going to be, I probably won't be fishing again. So, but lots of people do use them, and they like them a lot.
Okay.
They found out, you know, but the only reason I linked that is it's just the sort of questions you were posing about the priorities and building programs and everything else. Well, that is part of program building, I think, in my mind.
And is the old system that you referred to paper? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
All right.
Paper, a phone, but more and more people, I'll give you an example of how that is shaking out. The people that supply the paper logbooks and the service, and with that service is the data service, it is the 1-800 number, all of these sort of things. That pool is shrinking. The electronic is starting to take over a bunch of the business from there, down to the point where if they can't be solely identified as the sole service provider for paper logbooks, they don't want to take it on because they don't want to put up the money to have them all printed, because people are constantly changing over to the electronic end of things.
All right. Mr. Malloway, in terms of what we were talking about before, a few moments ago, the need to have good data management systems, and that takes some money, of course, and the two positions, do you see those as priorities? And as well, do you see any additional ones that are not presently contemplated but should be?
Yeah, I agree that that should be a priority. I think that until we can believe each other's stories, we're going to need to be moving towards something like that. The way it is now, folks in the recreational or sports or First Nations fisheries or the general public may not believe what we say or what we say is going on. I think that the more work that we can do to go in that direction, the better.
In addition to the point about believing each other's stories, as you put it, do you agree that it's important to have good fish monitoring, catch reporting, so that quite apart from believing each other, there's a good data set of what's being caught, which assists with fisheries management year by year, the present year and planning for future years?
Yeah, I believe that's important, and you know, the more timely, the better, because the way it is now, and it has been, is that we sometimes have to wait for some time to find out how much fish one sector has caught. Like 1 year there was 1.5 million fish that were reported missing. 6 months later, we found out from the Salmon Commission that all of those fish were caught by the commercial fishery, and once the fish slips were counted up, they found out there were no missing fish. It never got widely reported because found fish aren't newsworthy.
I see. Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, is this appropriate time to break?
This hearing will now recess for 15 minutes.